A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to the channel once again. I really would like to get this whole entire thing based on the GWK content up and around because, as you know, there have been tons of people out there who have been requesting a bunch of new ideas for GWK, but also a lot of other inclusions for GWK that I could consider playing. I'm also probably going to get through with a 3-month activation for PlayStation Now, so that way I could start downloading more games from there as I did last year. But for right now, I would basically like to, announce real quickly that the last few days of usage with this new camera, the Canon G7X PowerShot Mark III, have been pretty well. I never quite expected some extreme HDR to pretty much be in development for new content. But yet here we are. I can't really say that I'm probably going to get rid of my Sony Handycam, maybe not for a while, but when that time comes, I will certainly have that sort of idea up on the board. But until then, I can at least consider using that as maybe a backup camera in case this one ever gets lost or stolen, or maybe something else might happen to it. I know I have it insured, and I know I have myself a good, receipt in the way in case something does happen to it, as well as the original packaging. That is, of course, until all that expires. But for right now, I would basically like to get along with a little sort of bonus thing coming around in terms of, GWK content production. Because as you know, I'm actually going to be trying to do some more The Enlightening Venture episodes, as I've kind of been absent from them for the past few days. And, that's mostly because I've been trying to do some number crunching on them. And before all of the problems with the hard drive and all that, I've basically had a lot of things take place in terms of trying to get data transfers onto a new hard drive. But because I'm not even close to being finished with all that, as I've said before, it still is possible that I might have to do, at least a few things to try and get it back under control once and for all. But as part of a little bonus that I'll probably do for GWK and at the request of some viewers I've had, especially with all the new followers I've been getting on Twitter, on my second Twitter account, I really gotta say, I'm starting to see another big exponential rise in my attention. Kind of like how I did with my first Twitter account before it had to be removed. But today, let's go and talk about the top 20 PS4 games that I've ever played. Now, there are a lot of them to choose from, but I was able to narrow down quite a bit and pretty much get in a lot of wiggle room based on what kind of games out there that I pretty much deemed as playable or not so playable, good or bad or in between. And then, of course, you really got to take in all the other factors that get put into play, including all the good stuff around there, like genre, variety, story, color, graphics, gameplay, duration from start to finish, as well as how much entertainment value and replay value you can pretty much get out of them. Not to mention the bad stuff, like glitches and crashes and many other horrible things that pretty much get put in there. Lots of video games that I've played have pretty much given me different results all the time. And I'm glad to say that I'm still going strong with all this GWK production, and gaming with Kaiju Force Neo is still going to be a really big deal, at least for the next entire decade. So, what I'm going to say is I got 20 picks here that I could pretty much say are some of the best games you'll ever play in your whole entire life. As a big-time gamer throughout the past several years, especially one who's been a content creator online for the past, decade and a half almost, it's safe to say that with all the different video games that I've played across multiple consoles, there's been tons of great picks out there, as well as some picks that are not so well received. But today, we're going to focus on the top 20 best PS4 games I've ever played, just from my own perspective. So without further ado, let's pretty much go ahead and get this one going right here. Number 20, Alien Isolation. Yeah, you can basically see the cover art right here, but Anyways, this is number 20 because of a few things. It's survival horror, it's basically creativity, and it's fighting for survival. On the set of a gigantic spaceship. In the same styling that the Alien movies by Ridley Scott have pretty much taken place, this game pretty much adapts from the lore of the franchise, but it does invent its own story. Essentially, it takes place between Alien and Aliens at the time period where Ellen Ripley was frozen and left in the void of space, before being recovered. And then, of course, we eventually heard out in Aliens where Ellen basically had a child. And in this particular instance, we have the child right here under our control. But this game basically does more than just simply take on the lore in the story between the first and second films. It essentially gives us a big idea about how many things have pretty much happened since the first encounter with the alien that Ripley faced against. And it also showed us a lot more about how evil such a corporation could potentially be. It was bad enough in the first Alien that the android that was in this film pretty much showed us just what was intentionally going to happen. What were Ripley's team doing in space in the first place on the Nostromo was pretty much one way to look at it. But this game really gives us a huge insight and allows us to learn even more about the franchise as we could possibly go to. It does keep in continuity with the first two films for the most part. So, of course, we're not really going to be hearing a lot of info like what happened in Alien Prometheus or Alien Covenant pretty much. And let's also not forget, there's actually been some news on a new Alien sequel called Awakening. And there's even been news about another Alien-based video game that could be released on the PlayStation 5. They're both slated for release somewhere here in 2021, but because of what's been happening right now, there's a good chance that both of which could be delayed until further notice. So with that in mind, that's number 20 for you. It has a really long duration, it's got some nice ways to be creative, lots of weapons and items that you can potentially get your hands on, and I tell you, the horror element in this is astoundingly well put together. For a more recent Alien game on a next-gen console, this one really nails it. And there's been tons of Alien games out there, but this one can pretty much rank higher than most of them. It's not boring, it always keeps you on your toes, just wanting to find out where the alien is gonna be. But in any case, don't try and scream because you're deep in space and no one can hear you. Number 19, Just Cause 3. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the Just Cause series itself. Square Enix had basically acquired the series prior to the release of Just Cause 3. And for the most part, they actually seem to be attempting to give us something that can very much be like what the new Tomb Raider games, the Final Fantasy games, and the Kingdom Hearts games could pretty much give us all the way around. But in terms of how Just Cause has been performing in recent years, we don't really see a lot of potential within it. Part 4, which was released in 2017, had flopped significantly. And even though there's been tons of astoundingly well-placed marketing strategies, as well as offers on the PlayStation Store for a lot of things that you can potentially get within the game, Just Cause 4 is something that even I, a big-time seeker, would rather not play by any means. I wouldn't consider it the Life of Black Tiger sort of game when it comes to PS4, but again, it's a bad game for a reason, and maybe even more than just one. But Just Cause 3, again, it basically gives us this good old Rico Rodriguez adventure that we've been hoping for by giving us one mission: destroy everything in sight, shoot everything that moves. And how it does that is, well, it gives us Rico with a combination of insane driving skills, paragliding, wingsuiting, parachuting, and yeah, lots of other insane skills that a lot of other big-time action heroes have managed to pull off successfully. But I can say that this is at least a good effort here. For the first entry into the Just Cause series on the PlayStation 4 and maybe other consoles related to it, it's probably no wonder why we're going to be seeing maybe a lot more. Although because, well, Just Cause 4 had flopped, I don't really know if there's ever going to be such a thing as Just Cause 5. But again, we have yet to see down the line if Square Enix is in fact planning to try and redeem the series by giving us a 5th game altogether. Number 18. Well, time to go into Resident Evil 7, otherwise called Resident Evil Biohazard. Yeah. Whether you call it the 7th in the game or you call it the Biohazard in the game, this one pretty much goes back to a lot of roots. It gives us, basically, another attempt at a first-person sort of gameplay where you control a new character in the series called Ethan Winters. The Winters family is basically together at one point in Louisiana. Mia Winters is down there in Louisiana, and Ethan hardly gets much contact other than a simple email from Mia explaining that, well, they have to meet up down there. So once Ethan does arrive down in that area, inside of a few abandoned houses, we get to know about the so-called Baker family. This is, in fact, an entire family's worth of evil characters that basically give us some pretty unique ways to be evil. But the reality of it is, this is in fact all just a plot. An extreme level of bioorganic substances, which is just simply referred to as mold, that basically goes into affect these people and therefore attempt to try and take out Ethan and Mia and the others. And this is all done by a young child, an entity known as Evelyn. Of course, there was actually a straight up sequel to this which actually just came out a few months ago, called Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village. So, I can't really be sure if that's actually supposed to be the new tradition nowadays, but maybe when we're actually going to be seeing a Resident Evil 9, then I guess we'll see for sure, if there's ever going to be a Part 9 in general. But all in all, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard certainly is an unbelievable game. And I've even played Resident Evil Village recently, so that pretty much goes to show I'm pretty much all put up to speed here, with a lot of topics still fresh in my mind. But let me tell you that Village is way more crazy than ever. It gives us that more open world sort of vibe, combined with the fact that you can also have a lot more creativity, and you even have yourself a merchant in that village, known as Duke. So, overall, the story surrounding both 7 and 8 in the Resident Evil series itself is unbelievably amazing. So, in the end though, with Resident Evil 7, the Baker family is all well put together, and Ethan basically takes out Evelyn once and for all. That is, of course, until 8 gives us a whole new story, with a whole new twist. But now it's time to move on to number 17, Super Meat Boy. Yeah, basically a bit of an old-timey sort of game out there that happens to basically give us that feeling of playing a bit of an arcade game but in more modernized times. Originally released in 2010, but eventually being remastered for the PS4, this game basically takes on the role of the character Super Meat Boy, who basically goes up to basically save the full-time lover from the evil Dr. Papy. Yeah, as weird of names as that sounds, this game is certainly pretty charming and lovable by any means. As a platforming game, a strategy game, and as a game where you really need to think fast on your feet, it certainly is quite a breathtaking experience. From all the different levels that you get in all the different worlds, including a giant salt factory, because apparently salt is meat's biggest weakness in this exact canon. But the thing is, this game sure is quite a delight. Of course, I featured it a lot on Gaming with Kaiju Force Neo, but expect it to appear a little bit more often these days. So with that in mind, here we go. Number 16, Metro Exodus. This is quite possibly one of the craziest, longest, and most extreme varieties when it comes to international-based open-world style survival horror games ever in history. Essentially speaking, if you're not very familiar with the Metro series, which includes Metro 2033, which was released in 2010, and then in 2013 with Metro Last Light, both of which were based on the famous novels by Dmitry Glukhovsky, simply known as Metro 33. And Metro 2033 and Metro Last Light, they both got combined together for a remastered edition of these games on a game called Metro Redux. This was also something that I pretty much played not long ago. But in all honesties, they both are pretty nice games. Though when it comes to Metro Exodus, being one of several titles that I have downloaded on PlayStation Now last fall, it certainly was an astounding experience. It was very long by any means. At least 18 to 19 hours of gameplay I was able to get through before it would be all over. But while I was, in fact, spending as much time as possible trying to get the game together, I really had to go ahead and comprehend extreme amounts of enemies that popped up left and right, small and large. And when I say large, I mean it. It is incredible to see stuff that is so astoundingly big that, well, I don't really know. I mean, it's very comparable in most ways to what Resident Evil gave us. So, in actuality, when you basically take the role of Artyom in Russia in these games, you're basically going on a whole new adventure that could be pretty much enough to put games like Resident Evil, Call of Duty, and maybe even Battlefield to shame. So in this way, let's go ahead and move on to number 15, which is actually a Need for Speed title called Need for Speed Rivals. Yep. Rivals was one of the first to be ported to the PS4, but in any way you look at it, the Need for Speed series I feel like had reached its peak by this point. Because this one not only gave us the characteristics of actually controlling both police and the racers themselves, but it also gave us a variety of other unique tactics that we could never find in the other games that existed at the time. Of course, since Rivals was released to the PS4 and became a really big success and also served as a bit of an advertising campaign for the official Need for Speed movie, which would come out later on, it sure does give us so many unique vibes that we could never really get anywhere else. And I really have to admit, there hasn't been much of Rivals involved in GWK, so I might have to revisit it at some point. So, whether you pretty much pick out any kind of different car out there, whether it be a Lamborghini or a Ford GT or a Mustang or somewhat, and then of course there are many unique gadgets and upgrades that you can put together to these cars. And these gadgets of course are capable of actually fighting back against the law. Or it's pretty much the other way around. As an officer, you can use your supercharged, super powerful cruiser, which also comes in a big variety of cars, which actually include a few that we never thought would exist in the police force. The Camaros, Corvettes, even the Hennessy Venom GT gets highlighted in the police force. And it's also interesting to know that in more recent years, a lot of police forces throughout the country have actually been picking up a lot of models, old and new, having them refurbished and restored, and basically using them as part of their own force, and their own fleet line of cruisers and interceptors. Yeah, in real life you could definitely see a lot of old and new cars being transformed into police cars of any sorts. Otherwise, Rivals is certainly enjoyable. Yet there are a lot of others that can be significantly better. Which basically brings on to number 14, Doom Eternal. The straight up sequel to Doom 2016, which rebooted the Doom franchise itself and basically gave us a whole new adventure, pretty much. Doom 2016 was amazing by any means. Being that I played that game years ago and I even had it on GWK for a little while, it was certainly quite an enjoyable title. Purely awesome. A list of different weapons that you can use to fight against lots of different demons from the ground, from the sky, or otherwise. And then of course you have unique bosses out there like the Cyber Demon and the Spider thing, pretty much. Yeah. But the story itself is just one thing about the new Doom franchise as it is. Doom Eternal being the sequel to the game, which was slated for release in late 2019, but because of some delays, it got pushed to early 2020. And let me tell you, when I first picked that game up almost as soon as it came out, I was pretty captivated by it. Rather entertained. It is a rather interesting title, to say the least. It certainly is, by any means, somehow better in so many ways. Maybe it's because of the fact that we are starting to get a bit more lore from the original Doom franchise, which was way back in the 90s. Like the fact that the Doomslayer actually had a pet rabbit called Daisy, and then we also can't forget that one point in time where, wow, the Slayer actually had a lot of things going on in the past where, wow, he was pretty much a Marine. Yeah. Those were some pretty nice sort of details that we were able to get along the way, but in all honesties, Eternal has a lot of unique merits that I certainly don't find wrong about it, by any means. Still, it's a great title, and I totally recommend it to anyone who's willing to play it. So, now we got ourselves number 13, Final Fantasy XV. Which in Roman numerals I found out actually translates to 15. So, Final Fantasy 15, if you will. I'm probably never going to get used to those kind of Roman numerals pretty much. So, just bear with me here. Final Fantasy 15, though, is certainly one of the best I might have ever played in history. Getting to know about the Final Fantasy series pretty much comes with a huge history lesson. When it was first pretty much developed in the 80s and 90s on the NES and SNES by developer Squaresoft. It's now known as Square Enix. In case you're familiar with the fact that, well, there were other franchises like Just Cause, Kingdom Hearts, and then the more recent Tomb Raider series, well, that's the same old company. Square Enix is pretty much a master at creating some pretty unique, adventurous, open world sort of games. Of all ages, pretty much. Tomb Raider is basically their side to the M-rated, well, gameplay cliche. And then of course we have ourselves the more kid-friendly variants with games like Final Fantasy XV and Kingdom Hearts. But you know what? Final Fantasy XV is just pure awesome. You got yourself a group of 4 friends, Prince Noctis, Ignis, Gladiolus, and Prompto. All 4 of whom are together to basically go out into the ginormous world inside the game itself. They all ride a unique vehicle called the Regalia. And I really have to be honest about this. The Regalia in this game certainly does have that sort of feel to where it feels like one of those new generation concept cars. And being that this game came out in 2016, along with a couple unique concepts that are almost exactly like the appearance of the Regalia in this game, it really does say something. But most of the other cars that are featured in this game do happen to resemble a lot of older cars in real life, like the 59 Chevy Biscayne, as well as some older trucks and all that good stuff. So it almost feels out of place, like they went from the future to the past. But you know what? It's cliches like those where it almost feels anachronistic in a way that really gives us a lot of mystery. What can you find in such a big game that's already big enough? It has a huge world to work with, It has a rather good cast by any means. But the most important detail to look at this is the gameplay itself. You have yourself 50 to 100 hours of gameplay that you can pretty much put together, depending on what kind of stuff you do there. From going through the story mode, to completing side quests, to basically going out there and pretty much engaging in battle with whatever creatures you come across. Small, medium, large, extra large. It's pretty much a never-ending cycle in a way. But this is in fact just one out of many amazing feats inside this particular Final Fantasy installment that gives all the kinds of enjoyability that you could potentially find. I spent more than 15 days alone playing Final Fantasy XV in July 2020. And I played the Royal Edition, which basically came out a few years later. But still, the kind of story that develops from this title itself, it just is impressive by any means. Graphics are nicely made, and you have yourself quite a bunch of stuff to do there. Square Enix knows what they're doing, so absolutely amazing right there. Yet, here we go. Number 12, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Yeah, that's right. This is currently the most recent that you can get in the entire Call of Duty franchise itself. And Call of Duty is certainly as big as it could possibly get. With so many amazing titles left and right, yeah, you're pretty much bound to hear me talk about a few of them. But in all honesty, I will say that Cold War is probably one of the best in general. And I will get to talk about a few others that are even better in any ways, but Cold War gives us that feeling that we are in fact in the Cold War. In the same way that we basically had ourselves the feeling of pretty much being in certain areas like World War II, the Vietnam War, and then of course in Cuba, thanks to other installments that basically gave us that sort of vibe. Like we were actually there at the time. I tell ya, these guys over at Treyarch, Sledgehammer Games, and Activision, and all these other companies that have gone ahead to develop these titles sure know what they're doing. And Cold War gave us that same old vibe that we got from all of the Black Ops games right back to where we started. Because this does in fact take place between the events of the first Black Ops and most of the events of Black Ops 2 pretty much. Basically taking place in the early 80s instead of the late 80s. So, with a variety of weapons of all sorts, like LMGs, SMGs, shotguns, pistols, and assault rifles, to a huge abundance of different things to do there. From the campaign, to multiplayer, to zombies. As simple as that. It's almost like a requirement to basically have some sort of zombies mode to it, so you basically get that kind of feel to it. And when it comes to zombies, though, you really do get what you could possibly get from all the other Black Ops games, plus any other installments that have some sort of zombies in it. So overall, Black Ops Cold War is just impressive. It's quite a nice installment for something that came out very recently. But there's been talks about another Call of Duty installment, so I guess we'll see down the line what we could get out of it in the future. Now it's time to move on to number 11, Kingdom Hearts 3. Yeah, that's right. This is a title that I'm actually looking forward to revisiting at some point because it's an incomplete playthrough. And the reason for this is simply because, well, like I've said before, it's an extremely long game. Final Fantasy XV had itself a good share of 50 to 100 hours, depending on what you could do there. And I really gotta say, when it comes to Kingdom Hearts 3, you can get pretty much a similar amount of gameplay put together, where you basically have the same sort of emphasis on the storyline that had been around since 2002 with the first ever Kingdom Hearts. It became a massive success nearly 20 years ago, and here we are, almost 2 full decades ahead into the future, and look at how big the Kingdom Hearts series has grown. It's grown to pretty much be an astounding series with more than 20 games put together. And with one of the most recent that I've come to know, which, I tell you, Kingdom Hearts is certainly an everlasting series, by any means. It's probably no wonder why we're never going to really see a true ending to this at all, but it might be for a good reason. With all the installments that I've basically gotten to know about, from the first Kingdom Hearts to the second Kingdom Hearts, to all of the other tangents around here and there that basically use whatever sort of subtitle convention that they could possibly get their hands on, like decimals, fractions, Greek, Roman numerals, and a lot of other things here and there. Kingdom Hearts does whatever it can to please its audiences, left and right, but also to give us a good connection to the kind of story. It may be chronologically confusing at first, but that's why I would pretty much suggest that you skip all the way to part 3. I have little more to say about it other than the fact that it really gives us everything we could ever want in a Disney game. You got Kingdom Hearts 3 with good old Sora, Donald Duck, and Goofy going on to a bunch of different worlds, starting in the world of Mount Olympus, which is where the movie Hercules takes place in. And then you go over to places like Twilight Town, which had been established earlier on in the series, that is the home of Roxas, whom of course was a nobody that was created by the resurrection of Kairi after Sora basically gave the heart away to rescue Kairi from doom. So, that's just pretty much what that's about there. But other than that, there are some amazing worlds that I've come to know about. You got the world of Tangled, known as Kingdom of Corona, and then you have the Toy Box. I don't really know why they couldn't just call it the Tri-County area, which is where the Toy Story series takes place in. And then of course you got a variety of other things. Lots of other franchises put together, such as Frozen, Winnie the Pooh, Pirates of the Caribbean, and even Big Hero 6. Yeah, they pretty much put together whatever kind of, well, later series as they could possibly get into, just to offer us some nice, unique insights on what Disney has pretty much been working on. There's even been talks of a supposed Kingdom Hearts 4. I don't really know exactly how long we'd have to wait until then, but who knows? Because of the fact that Disney has acquired the rights to use Marvel, Star Wars, and a lot of other licensed franchises, it makes you wonder what could they do for the next Kingdom Hearts game. If it were to be released on PlayStation 6 or even PlayStation 7, if we had to wait that long, then maybe we could finally get to see a lot of other franchises put together. Like, how about the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe put together in that film? Or maybe even the entire Star Wars series put together in that entire installment itself. Who knows what could happen? Otherwise, Kingdom Hearts 3 is definitely one of the best that Square Enix has made. I couldn't kid around on this. Hopefully I will be able to revisit it just so I can play the rest of it and get to know more about it, but, well, you know, I still got some time to go before I can basically take up that opportunity. Number 10, The Last of Us Part 2. Now let me tell you, this game is a lot more than what you think it is. A straight up sequel to The Last of Us Part 1, released in 2013, normally as well a part of the PlayStation 3 because of the fact that, well, it was released the same year that the PS4 came out, but again, it was a part of the PS4 for a while, but then here comes the sequel. Lots of people would pretty much be against sequels by any means, but when you take a look at how many franchises had gotten bigger because of the usage of sequels, then it's safe to say that The Last of Us certainly did give us quite a unique emphasis on what the future of the series could potentially be like. The Last of Us 1 was a rather big success, and it gave us a new way to look at Naughty Dog games that Uncharted didn't really give us to begin with. But The Last of Us Part 2, though, it's a lot more than just a sequel. It is a whole new way to look at the future. as it is set in the year 2038, 25 years after the events of the first game. So you could say it's basically trying to be a lot like Detroit Become Human because of that sort of, well, emphasis based on chronological placement in recent history. But you know what? Let's just say Detroit Become Human is probably not as relevant at this point as it is going to be later on here when I talk about it later. So, The Last of Us Part 2 is of course set in that same exact year, 2038, because, well, apparently that's just kind of what some people like to do. They like to give us a whole new look into the future about what has happened, basically. But simply put, The Last of Us Part 2 gives us a huge look into the story of what had basically gone wrong. Simply put, it was a rather big fungus-related pandemic that had taken over the entire world and infected so much of human civilization with this outrageous disease. And this outrageous disease is basically a complexion of different fungal-related organisms that are able to take over the human mind and render them zombie-like in a way. But when you really take a look at all of the things that have developed since the first game had come out, there has been so much lore that you pretty much get to know about. But let's just say that in the sequel, being a more recent game out there, you really get to know a whole lot more about it. And that's pretty much because of a lot of things. From a unique cast out there, including people like Ashley Johnson, Troy Baker, and Laura Bailey, to a rather amazing story that develops. Graphically, this is pretty much just what the whole entire, well, production of Naughty Dog games are like. They utilize motion capture technology to basically make it feel as real as possible. Live actors on a green screen or a blue screen basically doing the certain actions out there that you can see in the game itself. The movement and expression on these characters is unbelievable. It's like Harry and the Hendersons level unbelievable when it comes to ranges of expression and exciting action that takes place. It feels so real for anything at all that takes place. It was perfected in the early 2000s thanks to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, where Andy Serkis was pretty much known as the master of motion capture, which would also become more prevalent in King Kong 2005, which was also directed by Peter Jackson. And then since then, we have gotten ourselves a lot of unique ways that motion capture has been able to captivate us audiences. So it's good to know that it's still around. And motion capture has certainly been used a lot in Naughty Dog's games, just to give us a more realistic sort of look to it and a more realistic feel to it. So for The Last of Us Part 2, the adventures of Ellie Miller, the young child of good old Joel Miller, who ends up getting killed by Abby's team. Abby's team, known as the WLF, or Wolves, as it's simply put around, are based in Seattle, Washington. And Ellie, of course, travels out there along with, well, Dina, who's actually pregnant. They put out a huge emphasis on pregnancy throughout that whole game. I can't really be sure why that is, but the thing is, Ellie and Dina travel throughout the entire area in Seattle, Washington to figure out where Abby is and basically enact some serious revenge. And to do this, they really had to go through a lot of nightmarish catastrophes all over the place. They pick up weapons, they gather supplies, they do whatever they possibly can to find out what on earth is going on over there. And by the time they do, it is an extreme battle. A battle between good and evil, which is almost undeterminable. But then, of course, there comes the eventual scars. Yeah. The scars, of course, are some sort of, well, Native American-like race that just so happens to cross paths with Ellie and Dina as well as the WLFs. And, well, they apparently feel different when it comes to most of these different things around here. But it gets even better as the game starts to come to a close with the story itself, where Abby ends up going all the way down to California to try and regroup with some lost WLFs somewhere else on the side of the world. Ellie eventually gets the idea to go after Abby again, and eventually ends up getting the idea to travel down to California after doing some time in research to find out where Abby truly is. And it turns out that, well, there is yet another opposition out there called the Rattlers. And these guys do not mess around. I tell you, that final fight that happens, where you liberate an entire manor full of slaves, is crazy. Like, when you're playing as Ellie, using things out there like an SMG, a shotgun, and a bolt-action rifle, going after so many Rattlers at once. I mean, that's just what a good example of a one-man army is like. Going after so many people with nothing but a boatload of weapons in your hands. And lots of ingenuity and fast thinking. This is one of the best endings I've ever come to know about when it comes to gameplay. Survival horror, third-person shooter-based games like this really need to have a lot more credit than they're usually given. For The Last of Us Part 2, you can certainly check out a lot of gameplay that I managed to get of it, and you'll probably be seeing a lot more because of what GWK Season 6 is going to be going through pretty soon. Otherwise, I really gotta say, I still feel like it's one of the best that I've ever seen come out of Naughty Dog in history. But don't worry, because pretty soon there will certainly be others along the line that I will have to talk about pretty soon, because now let's get on with number 9. Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Yeah, I consider this to be better in a lot of ways compared to Black Ops Cold War. And it's probably for a couple of reasons. One reason is the unique setting. It's set pretty far into the future, pretty much. Not too distant, but also not too, well, recent here in the present. The second thing is, of course, the variety of weapons. This kind of weapon selection that undoubtedly takes place is pretty much without a lot of unique explanation. The kind of weapon selection in this is crazy. Pistols, shotguns, rifles, and all sorts of other things around here and there are just what you need to really have a good time in a Call of Duty game. But I'll tell you what, I was able to pretty much get first place in free-for-all mode 4 times in a row. And that's because of one weapon, the XMG-1 Akimbo. Yeah, pretty soon you will be seeing gameplay footage of just that, where I managed to get first place in free-for-all mode 4 times in a row with extreme amounts of kills, pretty much, and a nicely put together kill-death ratio. So, I tell you what, because of that alone, that's probably what makes this game way more enjoyable than many other Call of Duty installments, but I still have yet to put in another reason. So here you go. Number 3, Kevin Spacey. Yeah. This guy serves as an amazing cliché antagonist. One who does originally work out as a pretty nice accompanying protagonist to go alongside with the characters whom you play as, but that eventually turns on you, pretty much. And that's simply because Mitchell, Gideon, and many others in the game end up figuring out that there is a plot going against them. As crazy as that is, Irons is certainly, without a doubt, probably one of the best Call of Duty antagonists that I might have gotten to know about. Maybe not comparatively better than most out there, like Nikita Dragovich, Vladimir Makarov, or even General Shepard. Yeah, there's lots of antagonists out there in the games that are pretty much better by any means. But for good old Jonathan Irons here in this game, Advanced Warfare really gives us an amazing new look at how real-life actors, no matter how popular they are, they can really give us a new way to look at a way to basically interact with them like you never have. So, by all means, give this game a try. You will not regret it. Some people might not rate it very well, but others, like myself, know when to give out the good stuff about it, but to pretty much put out the flaws to the side in a very honest way. So let's move on to number 8, Minecraft. And I'm talking about the original, not story mode or dungeons. Even though I have played dungeons for a little while, the original Minecraft is still something that can pretty much never be beat. An original creation done by good old Notch, whom is now dead. So, of course, this is not really going to age very well, so I'm sorry about that. But anyways, since 2009, Minecraft has not only become one of the most revolutionary games in existence, but has also become one of the best known that we've ever had in history. It still has extreme amounts of revelation and a lot of relevance that we can never ignore. Even though it's been more than 12 years since the game's debuted in the marketplace, it goes to show that pretty much nothing could be beat at this point. But yet when it comes to my choices in gameplay, I've made a lot of calls out there that were probably not necessarily as well put together, but still, nonetheless, I give Minecraft 8th place because it at least still does remain true to its name, being one of the best games ever made in history. But in all honesties, there's tons of other games I've played that are considerably better. So you know what? Let's go and talk about the other 7 I still have yet to talk about as well. So, here we go. What could be better than Minecraft, the original? Well, here we go. Number 7, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. That's right. The most recent installment in the Dragon Ball Z video game library, and honestly, probably the best that I've ever come to know about. It's essentially like a flyover of the entire series of Dragon Ball Z's related storyline that takes place. You essentially have yourself the original story from Goku and Gohan being separated thanks to Raditz' attack, all the way up to the very end where Cell's tournament basically takes place. And this entire game gives us pretty much the same sort of storyline and purpose as many of the predecessors in the Dragon Ball Z video game series has done. Not to mention the animated series is from way back in the 80s and 90s. But Kakarot does a lot more than just reboot the franchise and remake the entire story from beginning to end with the original Dragon Ball Z canon. It pretty much gives us the same sort of cast, including Sean Schemmel as Goku, as well as Christopher Sabat as Vegeta. So not only are we getting the original voice actors back to pretty much reprise their roles one last time at least, but we are certainly getting a lot of incredible new feats with them. They remain true to their roles, because they are in fact the one and only Goku and Vegeta. And not to mention all the other characters around here and there, many of which have their old voices back, and some pretty much have newer voices to go along with them. But when you really look at it, the gameplay is really what pretty much convinces people like myself, hardcore Dragon Ball Z fans, to come along and play it for a while. The gameplay is what you'd expect. An open world style game with lots of creativity, with lots of activities to do, with lots of side quests, the main story itself to go with, and tons of other unique things to do out there. It's as simple as that. Open world capabilities is pretty much a well-known game mechanic in modern gaming history, and it's probably something we're going to be having for a long time. The NES and SNES, as well as some Genesis games, were best known for things like side-scrolling, as well as beat-em-up games, platforming games, and all that. And then, of course, we have ourselves things like the Xbox 2001, PlayStation 2, and GameCube, which pretty much utilized a more three-dimensional thing out there, while also trying to give us some better graphics. And then we pretty much came around to it and managed to make things even better with the PlayStation 3, Wii, and Xbox 360. But then here we have ourselves the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Wii U, and Nintendo Switch. But then, of course, we got ourselves PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, better known as Project Scarlet. This is pretty much a time where we're probably going to be in a true renaissance when it comes to new gaming varieties, as well as different genres to choose from. But chances are, we're probably going to be stuck with some of the same old ones that we've been having for a long time, because it can be pretty hard to put some new stuff together. Otherwise, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot may be another title that I will have to revisit one of these days, because it's yet another incomplete project. But the gameplay I probably get through on the rest of the time that I'll probably be able to play it through until I get to the very end of it may just be worth my time. It's that amazing. Trust me when I say it, you will never ever regret a single penny being put together towards this game. So let's get going on with number 6. And with this in mind, let's go ahead and focus on one last major pick for Call of Duty. I've already gone through a couple, so brace yourselves. This third one here is probably the best I've ever played myself. Call of Duty World War II. Yeah, that's right. Released in late 2017, nearly 4 years ago, World War II is probably by far the best that I could have possibly played. As accurate as it seems to be in connection to the real-life events that happened in World War II itself, which ran from 1939 to 1945, with the atomic bombing of Japan twice. And then, of course, the inevitable death of Adolf Hitler, thereby ending the German Reich, but also stopping the terrorism to Japan. World War II does so much that you could never expect coming. The main thing about this game that I happen to really prefer over many of the other installments, and what makes it so much more special, is its rather amazing array of different weapons to choose from. You got pistols, revolvers, submachine guns, light machine guns, heavy machine guns, pump shotguns, auto shotguns, and so much more. You got yourself all sorts of special weapons, upgrades that you can put together to different guns out there, including rifle grenades and bayonets, plus a unique variety of other items that you can use, like frag grenades, flashbangs, smoke bombs, mines, and so many other things out there that could pretty much put many of the other installments to shame. I really gotta say though, when it comes to World War II itself, it does have kind of a bland story going towards it. It doesn't necessarily focus on everything that happened in World War II, but it does do a lot of effort and gives us a lot of different treatment to it that does seem to remain loyal and true to the real life history that is World War II itself. But the multiplayer mode is more than enough to make up for it. It's probably the best multiplayer mode I've ever had in my entire life. It was at the time back then, especially before I got to Advanced Warfare, that I was able to set upon a bunch of personal records. And in case you haven't already seen a bunch of them on Gaming with Kaiju Force Neo, then I recommend that you go watch some of them. Especially from seasons 1, 2, and 3, and maybe a little bit of 4 as well. The point is, Call of Duty World War II, released in 2017, just so happens to be the best I've ever played. Somehow better than all of the Black Ops games, somehow better than all of the Modern Warfare titles, somehow better than many of the others out there like Infinite Warfare or Advanced Warfare or many of the others. It's so much more than almost everything else in many different ways that you didn't know was possible. So, again, call me insane if you feel like it, but it is still by far the best I've ever played. No doubt about it. So, here we go with number 5. one more Need for Speed title out there, because after all, in total I've played 4 on the PlayStation 4. Rivals, the 2015 reboot, Payback, and Heat, which was at the time the most recent. And I will tell you what about Heat real quickly, that well, it was not necessarily as amazingly well put together, stylish, for a variety of reasons. But if I had to pick one out of there that seems better than all of the other ones out there, it would have to be Payback, released in 2017, 2 years after the 2015 reboot and 2 years before Heat was released in late 2019. Payback really sets the bar a little high in a way. It really does seem that almost everybody would want to try to get into the Need for Speed craze that's still ongoing to the present day. Pretty soon we might see a new Need for Speed title, but for the moment, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that Payback sure is the best. It focuses on, well, the story of how one racer ends up letting, well, a rival crew steal a Koenigsegg Roadster. And with that, there goes a lot of effort and a lot of storyline that focuses on trying to get back that prized possession, which is a Koenigsegg Roadster. And the Koenigsegg, of course, happens to be the most powerful of all the cars out there. If you play into the game far enough, then you'll basically see what I'm talking about. But in all essence, you can get tons of mileage playing through that entire game. It's pretty much never boring, it does not seem to wear off on you quickly, and it really gives you those nice vibes that you can potentially get from other games out there, like The Crew, Forza Horizon, or even Gran Turismo. But Need for Speed Payback, of all of the driving games, racing games that I've played that involve real cars, certainly is the best. I definitely recommend that anyone out there go play it for a little while, and you'll see just how amazingly well put together it is, because Heat, of course, is a pretty good game, but it is flawed. I could spend all day talking about it, but what good would that be? Because now it's time to move on to number 4, Resident Evil 2 Remake. Yeah. The remade version of Resident Evil 2 released in 2019, the same year as many other games. But Resident Evil 2 Remake is more than just a simplified remake of the same exact game. It is in fact a combined effort of a third-person shooter, survival horror, some comedy, some elements that you never quite expect to come towards you. Of all the games that I could have possibly played that were survival horror based, the way that Resident Evil basically comes back to us from the old days to the new, it shows that sometimes the older games can always be the best. In this particular instance, we're being taken back to late 1998, when Resident Evil 2 was first released itself. It's almost like an exact time travel sort of thing that takes place, where we're really feeling like we're back in the year 1998. Of course, the first Resident Evil 2 was out before I was even born, but of course, when I played the remake, I can really imagine what life itself was like before my birth even took place. It really is as impressive of a time capsule as possible. And what's even better, supposedly, is the fact that you can really get a lot of mileage on this game itself. To complete the entire thing would take quite a while to pull off. It's certainly not like Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts or, well, most other games where you get to play for an awfully long time, but you can sure expect to have a lot of time pass by before you even go through enough to finish the entire story. You get to play as multiple characters in here. Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, as well as a handful of some others here and there as part of side stories that take place alongside the regular stories. But whether you play as either Leon or Claire, you can really get a lot of things going on for it as you basically travel around the Raccoon City Police Department headquarters building looking for certain items, trying to find a way out of the building to safety. And then of course it all turns quite what you would expect to take place in the original Resident Evil 2 it progressed through pretty quickly. It's basically like what the original King Kong gave us back in 1933, a nice fast-paced sort of way to tell the story smoothly and effectively while giving us some amazing visuals and at the same time giving us some rather decent audible sort of things for the time period that it was released in. But for the original Resident Evil 2, for PlayStation 1 graphics and sound that would pretty much come on every now and then, you can certainly look at it in multiple ways. Of course, with the remake version, everything's going to be better. Graphics, and sound, gameplay, and all that stuff. And that's all because it's 20 years later. But you really got to hand it to them. Capcom made the first Resident Evil 2 way back in the day. And here they are again, bringing us the same exact thing, back to the light. So, in a way, it really does feel like you're taking so many steps back into the past where you really see the true potential that probably could have taken place if PlayStation 1 hardware were capable enough of giving us PlayStation 4 style graphics and music and all that. Well, anyways, I tell you, that was the best Resident Evil game I played, but now it's time to move on to Quantic Dream. That's right. The company that gave us quite a few unique masterpieces for the time period throughout the 2010s, like Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, and then of course, there comes their biggest one by far, one of the best video games ever that I've played, that I've actually played through it multiple times. Their 2018 installment, Detroit Become Human. Released in spring 2018 as the third game made by Quantic Dream, this is without any doubt in the slightest, possibly the best that they've made. It's undeniably the best that Quantic Dream has ever made, mostly because of the fact that it's more recent. They've gone through some trial and error, they've learned from a lot of their mistakes in the past, and of course they're trying to push it to most limits to try and see what kind of capabilities they can possibly get. And what do they get out of it? Well, simply put, Detroit Become Human. The ultimate way to have a point-and-click game, as well as some other elements relating to story-driven related experiences, such as multiple pathways, because you do in fact get a huge variety of different outcomes that you could possibly unlock throughout the game. Of course, to have a single playthrough would take about 8 hours to complete if you were playing it on a marathon sort of thing, but the fact is, I myself, I was so captivated by all of the possible mysteries and intrigues that this thing held that I remember playing it for the first time ever last June, and well, since then I've actually gone ahead and played it multiple times. 5 whole playthroughs I managed to get out of that entire game. 5. And that's a combined total of around 40 hours if you do the math. So it's pretty comparable to Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy, pretty much most other games that happen to be that sort of time span from beginning to end, but that's 5 entire playthroughs. And yet there's still hundreds of different possibilities that I could potentially unlock in the game itself. Detroit Become Human has so many treasures and so many things that you could potentially do that it's beyond everything that we've ever come across. And this was in 2018, pretty much at the height of the PlayStation 4 and its massive success that's still lingering around even while the PlayStation 5 is of relevance and the biggest talk of the century at this point. But you never really know. Maybe we will talk more about the PlayStation 5 eventually if marketing starts to come into play a little more often, and then obviously PlayStation 5 consoles and other such stuff that come along with it are more in stock, but that doesn't seem possible for a while. Until then, I really gotta hand it to you. Detroit Become Human is more than just a simple masterpiece made by Quantic Dream, kind of a competitor to that of Telltale Games. When it comes to games that are based on roleplay, point and click, action, story-driven plot lines, as well as multiple tiers and pathways that you can potentially unlock along the way, it's got amazing cast members in it, like Brian DeChart, Valerie Curry, Jesse Williams, Lance Henriksen, and even Clancy Brown. That's right. This is the first time ever since Captain Hadley from Shawshank Redemption, pretty much. And there may have been a few other notable appearances here and there that I don't really know about, but still. Clancy Brown, the same old Mr. Eugene Krabs of the Krusty Krab, voicing Lieutenant Hank Anderson. I tell you what, the game itself is already so amazing with Clancy Brown in it that you don't really need much of anything else. Even with the rather impressive Optimus Prime-esque speeches of Jesse Williams as Marcus, or maybe the more sort of, well, determined, no-nonsense law enforcement kind of vibe that you can get as Connor, who is played by Brian DeChart, flipping a coin in so many ways that no ordinary person would do, and pretty much solving crimes. Like the mystery gang and all other things like that combined. That same old classic sort of detective vibe that you can get with many other things. That cliche is still a big thing. So much so that, well, Knives Out is still a massive success because of that classic sort of whodunit vibe that you can pretty much get in a lot of ways. And as for Valerie Curry, well, the emotional aspect that happens between a parent and a child having to face an abusive family, it really does bring a lot of sense that happens in real life. Abusive people are all over the place. It's a unique reminder and an amazing satire that proves to us that abuse, racism, and so many other things out there are still of relevance. The way Quantic Dream was able to successfully capitalize on these subjects as they were still very relevant in those times, even here in recent years, we're still facing these kind of problems all the time. It almost seems like it's never going to end at all, but one day we ought to find a way. Otherwise, civilization might crumble before our very own eyes. So, end of story, pretty much, on that whole entire thing. Detroit Become Human is one of the best ever in existence. Quantic Dream knew what they were doing there, and they certainly gave us quite an amazing masterpiece that we will never forget. Ever. And so, that brings us to, well, number 2. What could possibly be better than that? Then, well, let me tell you. Red Dead Redemption 2. Yeah. The straight-up sequel to Red Dead Redemption, which was first released in 2005. Just like with Kingdom Hearts 3, Red Dead Redemption 2 took 13 years to arrive. When it came out on the PlayStation 4, we were excited to see what could potentially take place. And I guess that's even more so given to the fact that, well, we're probably going to be facing a lot of new, unique masterpieces that we never expected to come. But in all honesties, the way I see anything that could happen, creativity is a big thing out there. As for Red Dead Redemption 2, it does seem like that, well, we are probably going to be getting way more games out there like this. And I've done a lot of research on this, and it does seem that it is one of the most expensive video games ever made. It cost well over $300 million just to make. I tell you, there's certainly a lot of people out there who are willing to spend so much money out there. But in all honesties, I feel like that with Rockstar Games and the many other developers that were behind this, they certainly had to spare no expense just to give us such a unique masterpiece that we, of course, wanted to have. A sequel to Red Dead Redemption was certainly a talk of, well, the whole decade. But of course, it did not come about until 2018, around the same time that Marvel's new Spider-Man game at the time was released. And there was a sequel for that too, actually. It came out earlier back in 2020, but for Red Dead Redemption 2, again, the fact that it took quite a while to make and a lot of money to make, that really leaves us wondering, what kind of things are we going to be seeing in the Red Dead Redemption franchise in the future? Well, to that, I could say that there could be a lot of possibilities. But the story about Red Dead Redemption 2 is as simple as this. You have yourself a gang in the year 1899 that is actually trying to escape from the law. The law, of course, that had been developing a lot more often throughout the remainder of the 19th century. And by the time the 20th century was about to come around, gangs and other sorts of outlaw-based Wild West cliches and all that good stuff that happened throughout history was coming to an end. Democracy was coming in, about to stop anything that would potentially take place that would be related to gang violence and outlaw-related schemes that could potentially happen. And with that in mind, we not only have ourselves a big part of history that allowed us to pretty much become who we are nowadays, a more civilized civilization, but the thing is, Red Dead Redemption 2 basically gave us the path to redemption. That classic cliche that still is played a lot in most franchises. If you're familiar with the fact that Roger the Alien, as Ricky Spanish, had tried to go down a path to redemption thanks to Steve, well, it's much like that. In this particular case, though, it's much like about Arthur Morgan, leader of the gang that comes all the way from a foreign area called Blackwater, that is now under guard by the law all over the place. And they are, of course, on a mission to try and retrieve their belongings from that area, but because of so many oppositions that come around every now and then, including lots of other things that come around here and there, well, it's fair to say that this entire game is giving us a lot more than just a simple vibe that we could potentially get from many other titles where these people try to become good rather than evil. And with that in mind, there always comes a price to pay whenever it tries, well, redemption. Whenever someone tries redemption, a lot of things could potentially happen. Lots of people would, well, become angered by the fact that you are trying to come back to their lives. And this is something that we can see happen a lot. Lots of old acquaintances and the like start coming back. If you're familiar with the Red Dead Redemption canon in general throughout the whole franchise, then, well, this is kind of what it's part of. Otherwise, though, Red Dead Redemption 2 simply has everything you need to feel entertained all around, never getting bored. And with so many things to do here, you really have all that you need to have, well, probably one of the only games in your entire collection. You don't really need to spend many more dollars or even pennies on anything else. Just have Red Dead Redemption 2 in your collection, and that would pretty much be it. Arthur Morgan going on a long, treacherous, dangerous, and treacherously enough, well, a bad kind of journey. A long journey that does in fact have a lot of twists and turns, but in the end, well, it does certainly have tons of things for you to do. Open world mechanics, plus a lot of capabilities that you can pull off, with an honor bar describing how honorful or dishonorable you are. Depending on what kind of acts you do, which are considered either honorable or dishonorable, they can fill up your meter or they can allow your meter to decrease in honor level. In terms of my playthrough, well, I of course end up going for the honorable sort of side to these things. As much as possible, at least. Because I'm that kind of person. I like to employ redemption to anybody who might be going down in flames. Literally. So of course the story, the mechanics, gameplay, creativity, and so many other things out there, combined with the fact that this was yet another case where it involved a lot of animation related work to make it as realistic as possible. It really is pretty much the ultimate masterpiece that Rockstar did not disappoint, despite a lot of problems that happened before then. But in the end, we got ourselves, quite possibly, one of the highest ranking games out there in terms of how expensive it was to make, but also one of the best in terms of, well, overall gameplay, style, graphics, and much other sort of things that take place within this. And now you're probably wondering, what could possibly top any of these other games out here? Well, let me give you the answer to that. Ark Survival Evolved. Yeah, that's right. Originally developed by a much smaller company called Wildcard Entertainment, and now it's being passed on over to Snail Gaming, where it was eventually made off on its own tangent with Pixel Ark, Ark Park, and Ark VR. The original Ark Survival Evolved, which was at the time a PC game made around 2015, and then ported to the PlayStation 4 around 2017. I really gotta say that Ark Survival Evolved has way more than you would ever expect. It's an overwhelmingly amazing piece of craftsmanship. It really goes to show that you could do everything that you could ever possibly want. Anything you could wish for, it's all right there in front of you. You have impressive graphics. You have incredible mechanics that allow you to do whatever you possibly want, including the ability to lay out emotes for people, like hiding your hat, waving to people, or basically crouching down on the ground and taking a crap. Literally. There's actually feces in this game. But it is for the sole purpose of using it as fertilizer. Which of course is a realistic sort of scenario where someone could basically dig a hole into the ground and use it to defecate as a makeshift toilet. But other than that, I will say that there are so many other reasons out there that make this game so enjoyable that you would never want to have this game away from you in any possible way. As a big time player of Ark, there's really a lot for me to say out there. And I might as well go ahead and label it out quickly because of how much time I've already spent on this entire countdown. But anyways, there are, in fact, lots of possibilities that you can pull off in this game alone. You're basically a person who is stranded, naked, freezing, starving, possibly thirsty, and a lot of other things on islands that appear to be uncharted, but they are in fact inhabited with terrifying creatures of all proportions, from the smaller in size to the larger in size. And then of course you have yourself the legendary monsters that inhabit these landscapes. Of course, when I'm talking about Ark Survival Evolved, I'm mainly referring to the main storyline, which is just simply called The Island. And there are a bunch of other expansions that you can pretty much add on to it in order to enhance gameplay experience and also add on to more of your time just to make more of your money's worth. I'd say with every single map pack that I myself have gone through, I've basically gone through the island. I've spent so much time on the island alone, it's crazy. But I've also spent some time on other map packs, including Scorched Earth, The Center, and I even, well, played some Valguero, which was at the time when I played a lot of Ark Survival Evolved. It was mainly from late 2018 up until around the end of 2020 for the most part, when I basically sold that copy off just to get my hands on some other games at GameStop. Before all of this new stuff relating to GameStop stock prices started pretty much going around all over the place. Well anyways, at the time that I've had Ark in my possession, a copy of the game itself on CD for the most part, it was a bit hard for me to comprehend it at this point because there were certainly a lot of things out there in relation to, well, the gameplay itself, and as a result it was hard for me to basically, well, keep in tune with it. By the time I was able to get used to it, after seeing a few gameplay videos about it on YouTube and all that, I was actually able to get in a lot of practice. And when I did, I was progressing left and right. It doesn't really appear to be that easy. So many people out there find it to be very frustrating and sometimes rather, well, angering by any means. But that's probably because they aren't really giving this kind of game a chance. It is more than just a challenge of comprehending the sort of real-life factuality that surrounds the fact that some people have become castaways on islands and they have to learn how to survive. Without that, they might die very quickly. And in this particular instance, we get that sort of real satirical feel to it, even though there's not very much voice acting involved with the avatar whom you play as, which, of course, speaking of the avatar, that's another very unique way to pretty much make this game extremely worthwhile and beyond your wildest imaginations. When you create your own character in the game itself, a human survivor, you have so many unique sets that you can basically mess around with. You could spend a lot of time adjusting the different sliders and the like to change a person's size, to change a person's height, your person's weight, your person's eye color, how big your jaw is, and how far your ears are basically out and about. It's just hilarious when you really get to know about how the creativity comes from most people's imagination. It's just amazingly well put together. The kind of comedy that reflects upon creating your own avatar. Of course, this is just one of so many things that can be done even before you get to the real game. Like I've said before, there are other map packs that you can basically purchase from the PlayStation Store or otherwise. And other than the few that I mentioned, like the Island, Valguero, the Center, Scorched Earth, you also have others out there like Ragnarok, Aberration, Extinction, plus you also got some more recent ones like Genesis, and basically others here and there, because I've not really been in track with it since, again, I no longer have the game and I no longer really want to play the game. Because I'm trying to focus a little bit more on some other titles out there that some people have requested me to play and otherwise. Although I will still go as far as to say, this game has so much that you can potentially do here. When you start off in the game itself, regardless of what map it is, and regardless of who your survivor is, and all that other stuff, it basically is as simple as having a wrist implant on you to basically show what your health is like, what your food, water intake are like, your torpidity, which basically refers to how close you are to feeling as if you were sedated. So in layman's terms, if your torpidity level fills up, you'll end up falling asleep before you have a chance to say, whoops, I messed up. I got in the way of some really dangerous creatures out there that are able to put me to sleep really quickly and then eventually kill me while I'm sleeping. I will admit, I've had quite a few run-ins with that sort of thing myself. I've gotten attacked by a lot of creatures of all sorts. And when it comes to the creatures, it's an overabundance of extreme excitement. You have basically whatever you could possibly find in paleontology and prehistory that pretty much dates back to millions of years or even billions of years. Existence is surely abundant. With millions of animal species that used to roam this planet, you got yourself dinosaurs like the Velociraptor, Compsognathus, T-Rex, Giganotosaurus, Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and you even got yourself the mighty Titanosaurus. Yeah, not like the Godzilla variety though, unfortunately, but that would have been pretty awesome by any means. You also get yourself a lot of other things that were supposedly part of mythology, like the almighty, well, Bigfoot. Yeah, seriously. But in this game, it's pretty much referred to as a Gigantopithecus, which is in fact a real species that seemed to have pretty much derived from the more ancient side of, well, primates by any means. And Gigantopithecus is, well, let's just say it's one of the many Pithecus creatures that pretty much roam the worlds of Ark itself. You also have the Mesopithecus, which is basically like your common monkey or chimp. And then, of course, there's one of a few select bosses that you fight in the game. Megapithecus. Yeah. One of a few bosses that these amazing developers made up for us to fight against. After all, you can't really have a good video game without a boss, or basically something that can be quite a challenge for the players involved. And also, as a new way to have a change to scenery, just so you don't end up getting bored, pretty much. But other than the Megapithecus, on the island you face against a few other bosses. You have yourself the dragon. Yeah, that's just simple as that, the dragon. It's certainly no Toothless, it's certainly no Draco from Dragonheart, and it's certainly no, well, nothing like any sorts. It's just simply the dragon. It is still unbelievable though when it comes to, well, its size, staggering power, and many other things that are put into play. But then you even got yourself something called the Broodmother Lycerix, which is a part of, well, let's say, the insect kingdom that also roams the area. So in a pinch, you have yourself insects, primates, reptiles, and well, of course you can't really go far without mentioning a lot of other things out there. Mammals, and, well, you of course got yourself all animals in all certain terrains. You got animals that are roaming the deserts, the mountains, the skies, the seas, and let me tell you about the oceans in Ark as well. They're probably one of the most challenging things to overcome, because not only are you going to be finding some of the most terrifying creatures down there in the depths of the oceans across all maps that you could potentially find, but you also have to deal with the fact that you cannot breathe underwater. That is, of course, unless you have the appropriate gear. And that's quite a challenge by any means. To basically go up against things out there like Megalodons and Tussotoothuses, which is basically their version of the colossal squid, and even the legendary Leedsichthys, probably one of the largest fish-like creatures ever in existence. I really tell you, the fact that I've spent a lot of time underwater is just one thing, but when you really get down to it, the waters in Ark Survival Evolved are something you probably would want to stay out of for a while until you get the right kind of stuff put together. It's not just about the scuba gear, it's also about the weapons. Because underwater you can't really do a whole lot except shoot a bunch of spear bolts out of a good old, well, harpoon launcher. Yeah, I tell you that. In all the time that I played Ark, I've really gotten to know a bunch of other things as well. The creative input that happens in the game. Lots of people compare it to Minecraft, but just having better graphics and better sounds and pretty much everything is better in Ark. I see it as something way more than just a copy of what Minecraft gave us back in the day. Sure, they might have basically got inspiration to base their certain gameplay off of what Minecraft gave us, but I feel like that with all the developers put into play, and honestly speaking, it wasn't just Minecraft that pretty much inspired Ark itself. And when it comes to development of the game itself, it wasn't just Studio Wildcard, but Wildcard, of course, was accompanied by many others. Just looking at the official Ark Survival Evolved wiki page on fandom.com, I'm basically able to get way more info than I could possibly comprehend at the same time. So again, Wildcard was accompanied by many other developers at the time. You also got yourself Effecto Studios, Virtual Basement, Instinct Games, Abstraction, as well as SAE. Yeah. Of course, Snail Gaming was able to acquire the licensing rights to the game itself, so they were able to make games based off of Ark in other unique ways. They were able to make Pixel Ark, which that really brings us a lot closer to Minecraft than ever. It's basically a combination between Minecraft and Ark blended together into one. And then of course there was Ark Park, which is a VR game. So it's basically the same sort of thing as you could probably get with maybe Jurassic Park Builder or Jurassic World Builder, except this is basically a PS4 game. A nice way to bring the mobile game aspect to the PS4. But because I don't have a VR set and I don't have much other stuff around, I can't really play that game. So I'm sorry to those who might expect me to be playing something on VR, but Dreams was pretty close at least. You could play that in VR, but you can also choose not to, which is also okay. But if there's a few other things that I can also say right here, then well, one, all the stuff that's basically considered. You got multiple maps, you got multiple ways of creativity because of the fact that, well, there's a progression system involved and a lot of things that you can potentially upgrade in there, like your health bar, water, food, oxygen, stamina, torpidity, and, well, many other things to be considered. And with that progression system, you also get yourself survival points. You can use these points to basically learn new engrams, which in turn are going to allow you to basically create anything else in the game. You start off with a small amount of engrams that you already know about, things like campfires, spears, and basic building supplies pretty much here and there. But you can also spend a lot of time in the game progressing to the point where you can eventually get yourself some other stuff. The second reason is the fact that, well, the game itself, other than having some amazing gameplay and some rather inspirational creativity and all this unique development that have been put together and must have taken a lot of time and money to put together all this entire time, I really have to talk about the music in this game. The score in this game is composed by Gareth Coker, whom you probably already know from, well, a few other obscure titles here and there. But I really gotta say, at the same time that this is probably the best known soundtrack that Coker's ever composed in gaming history, this one might as well just be one of the greatest video game compositions that I myself have ever heard. I mean, I couldn't even make this stuff up if I tried, but, well, so to speak, this is pretty much just what it's all about at this point. The kind of compositions that you have with basic Hollywood-style cinematic kind of vibes to it, and just some unbelievable, well-orchestrated scores to it with a bunch of tracks to choose from. And a lot of these tracks are basically set upon like certain sections in the game where you can't really hear them until you progress far enough. Like if you get to the boss battles, or if you make it to the final stage, basically going to the Ascension, which is basically your way of completing the game. You defeat the Overseer, something of course that had been watching you the entire time, monitoring your progress and figuring out your evolution itself. Once you defeat this exact sort of AI system that is trapped way above the planet itself that you're above, then well, you basically get yourself a little prize at the end. The Ascension. Basically your way of possibly progressing over to, well, another part in the game where it does seem to be set upon, but otherwise, the game sure has some amazing tunes to put together. Gareth Coker truly nailed it. And if I have to basically point out a third and final thing, it's that, well, even though Ark's already gone off on quite a bit of a tangent after being, well, licensed towards Snail Gaming, there's actually been talks of a sequel. Yes, Ark Survival Evolved 2. A sequel! Supposedly being slated for release next year for the PlayStation 5 and possibly other consoles. But when you really get to it, a sequel to Ark Survival Evolved, already the greatest game in history, at least to my knowledge, might actually get even better. This one is apparently advertising to a lot of people out there that it's actually going to be starring a lot of highly acclaimed actors out there, including Vin Diesel from the Fast and the Furious, plus Russell Crowe, plus many other well-known people out there throughout our time period. And, well, I guess we still have yet to hear what other kinds of info is down the line, but seeing that I've already watched the trailer based on this exact sort of concept of a sequel surrounding Ark Survival Evolved, it's probably no wonder why apparently this game might as well just be the greatest thing ever in history. If it's big enough to get a sequel, then we know it's probably going to be even better at some point. Maybe Ark Survival Evolved 2 will do well, or maybe it'll be the complete opposite. Either way, we still have until next year to see what we can potentially find out in this instance. So with that in mind, Ark Survival Evolved Part 2. We still have a while to go with it. But when that does happen, I don't really know if I would want to play it. Especially because of me wanting to retire from gaming. So, to put it in a nutshell, lots of unique highlights from this. A variety of different maps, and therefore different environments and scenery to choose from. The way that you can create your avatar. Unbelievable creatures and the likes of all proportions and all things well put together that you can basically take on and fight, or you can even tame them, depending on how skillful and how much risks you are willing to take. And then of course you gotta learn about the music, composed by Gareth Coker, quite possibly one of the best compositions I've ever heard in history. And then the fact that the game is so successful, it's gone off on its own tangent, and is even getting a sequel next year. No doubt about it. This is the greatest thing ever in history of gaming. It's certainly better than Super Mario on the Nintendo Entertainment System, or quite possibly Shadows of the Empire on the Nintendo 64, or when you really look at it, Wii Sports on the Wii. I tell you, this game really surpasses so many expectations. And I tell you what, Minecraft has more than just a bittersweet rival with this game itself. It takes a lot of inspiration from Minecraft, plus many other titles. But in a pinch, all these developers working together, spending so much money and time, from the time they first began development in October 2014, to the point where in 2015 they made an initial test release as part of an early access port to PCs, and then eventually making a full-on slated release as a console port 2017, and since then it has been growing significantly. There's been lots of new stuff added onto it, there's been lots of amazing new opportunities that you can unlock in the game itself, and plenty of things you can potentially do here. You'll get more time and money's worth than you could possibly get on many of the other games I've talked about combined. It's so good that, I'll tell you what, I've spent way more time on Ark than I have on many other games I've ever played. Whether it be the Final Fantasy series, Kingdom Hearts, Just Cause, Alien Isolation, The Last of Us Part 2, all the Resident Evil games, all the Red Dead Redemption games out there, all the Call of Duty games, etc., etc. You could find so much more in this game than anything else. But again, there's still the possibility that maybe the sequel could be better. All we have to do is wait, and possibly start wishing for plenty of other unique opportunities to arise. So with that in mind, that's all I got to say about that game. All this time that I've spent talking about Ark, I really don't know at this point. But I will say for sure that, wow, I've had quite a good countdown here. Quite a nice usage of my time with this new camera and a lot of these new things that I'm also going to be hoping to use in the future. But until that happens, I cannot entirely be sure of how much of anything else is going to be taking place. But I do know maybe I will get more opportunities to use this camera for a bunch of other things out there. Until that happens, if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.